Neuromarketing is the place where brain science and marketing meet. It's the new hot tool for marketers to tap into the consumer's mind and create new products that sell.
It's a very powerful thought.
Marketing has always been closely related to psychology. It is the art of persuasion. Everyone wants to find new methods of making people do and buy stuff. But for a very long time, information was hard to come by, and understanding what triggers the human mind was mostly a mystery. In the past decade or so, marketing experts have become more and more passionate about the human brain and are trying to figure out how neuromarketing can help build the brands of the future.
Today we know that more than 30% of the Fortune 100 brands now are using neuromarketing in all their strategic research work.
Neuromarketing has proven that in order to sell, you need not to sell the products, but rather seduce your customer.
Even when we think we're making a so-called rational decision, it's always emotional too. And the reason is this: the brain is designed when we face a decision point and have a number of options to emotionally valence or weight each option. So there's no decision outside of mathematics, which is a purely theoretical universe, that is free of emotion. It's very tacit, subtle emotion, but still emotionally weighted. And even in mathematics, it may operate too, I'm not convinced. But when we're making any decision in life, it's always emotional, even if we think it's a so-called rational decision.
On this episode of Market, find out how neuromarketing works, if it's truly ethical to poke the brain in order to push more and more products, and how this brain science will change the future of marketing.
It's very popular now to try and introduce cognitive science to understanding consumers, and in particular the great darling of brain sciences is the brain scan. Now this is very popular for lots of reasons. One is it's not painful for people, they can be fully conscious, and also the pictures that you get are attractive to look at and seemingly are very clear and easy to understand. You have bits of brain lighting up.
The ability to evoke an emotional response from an ad or marketing promotion is one of the most praised goals for the creative department of any given company. During the past few decades, marketing studies have searched for methods to be able to understand and measure emotional responses to determine effectiveness of messages that are put out there by advertisers.
You cannot ask people about their impression of a smell or a tactile sensation or taste. It's so difficult to verbalize and feeling across our senses because we simply do not have the right vocabulary in order to do so.
Neuromarketing has presented tools to predict product marketplace performance. It's sort of like the super evolution of focus groups, save for the fact that it's harder for the brain to try to lie to you or be peer pressured into giving marketers a half-truth.
In 2008, I conducted the largest neuroscience or neuromarketing experiment in the world, a $7 million study where we used fMRI to scan consumers' brains in order to understand what really goes on in our non-conscious brain. The foundation for this experiment was to say, well, if we can get a sense of the non-conscious part of our brain, which by the way is 85% of everything you and I do every day, well then we're closer to find out what we really feel as we live and buy stuff every day. And based on that, we can perhaps create advertising campaigns which are a little bit more effective than they are today.
Studying responses in stimuli and brain reaction can help figure out what makes ideas contagious and therefore be able to fabricate standardized formulas for things that work.
Now that's not to say that we are putting ethics on the shelf. It's just as much to say advertising today is bombarding you and I. We're exposed to 2 million TV commercials throughout life. Can we in any way to make an ad more influential? On the other hand, to cut the numbers of ads so we're not bombarded with as much crap as we are today. That was really the objective, and the answer was yes, it really does work.
Using MRI machines to monitor brain activity, neuromarketing studies the brain's reaction to certain triggers like appearance, smell, stories, and even associating a celebrity with a specific brand. Observing activity before, during, and after stimuli can lead to understand how the brain works and what type of ideas people are reacting better to.
Let's think about information processing. If you're looking at a screen, you have many different things to look at. You have to decide what you're going to click on. You have adverts moving, you've probably got a movie playing, you've got the ability to hypertext or to click on certain... Now you have to decide quite quickly what interests you, what doesn't interest you. You have to keep making choices, even though it's one display. And it's very rare nowadays on a computer screen you to have one thing only. You don't.
The advertising industry spent almost $500 billion during 2011, and yet over 30% of consumers say that advertising does not understand them nor reflect what they truly want from brands. So, what have marketers learnt from brain scans and applying science into marketing?
Today, advertising doesn't really work. We spend an enormous amount of money on advertising to consumers and people can't really remember anything. So obviously something happens. Either it must be we're storing the knowledge or information at an unconscious level, which is what we're trying to understand, or else it maybe just goes out in a black hole. Now, I fundamentally do not believe that we forget all of this stuff. I fundamentally believe we store it somewhere. So to use neuromarketing in order to understand where it goes and how it affects us is probably the best and the only choice we have right now in understanding the consumer and the future of advertising.
You've always got adverts and other things. So on the one hand, it draws your attention towards a screen, but then it fragments that attention. So just like with driving, you have to be alert to all the different things going on.
The trick is to think unconventional, and I think that's where advertising agencies have a strong role. They have the creative talent in order to break the black box and think outside the box in new different directions. Every brand, every product can create semantic markers, and really my philosophy is to come up with that small idea was actually so big that it will change or transform a brand, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune.
Up next, action, reaction, and emotion put into practice. Find out how some brands have used neuromarketing to push products and services into market. Action, reaction, and emotion. How does the brain work? How has marketing used neuromarketing? At an ARF conference in 2004, Ken Reinhardt, chairman of DDB, said that the advertising industry produces great campaigns only 20% of the time at the most, and that it was of primary importance to bring those numbers up. Neuromarketing has proven to be a tool to understanding the way emotion works, and can be the foundation to creating thought and action.
Advertising can work. I just think it comes back to three things. One is to ensure a stronger emotional engagement using friends and family members as ambassadors for certain brands and products. Secondly, to create that emotional engagement in the way we position brands in such a way that I feel it represents me and my image, or it creates some sort of aspiration. And thirdly, that we stand out from the crowd in a much more professional way. That's what I call a somatic marker. Somatic marker is something so dramatic you'll never ever forget it. So I think those three different techniques is probably the answer to increase the effect of advertising. Because today, let's be frank, it really is a struggling industry.
Martin Lindstrom and many others in the industry hope not for more and more products being sold, but rather for a better quality and effective communication.
Somatic marker can be everything from a little thing like my business card. You'll see that I folded the corner and you have the word brand embossed into the card. Now, what's interesting is this is a mini somatic marker because you don't really bend the corner of the business card. And secondly, you don't touch it normally. But because I'm breaking a rule, it actually becomes a little bookmark in my brain. And you will probably never forget my business card. So this is an example of a very small somatic marker which can stand out in a dramatic way.
Where advertising research and tracking measures had failed to explain advertising-driven incremental sales across different executions and campaigns, neuromarketing seems to be succeeding.
It's just creative thinking. It's everything from when Orange, the telecommunication company in the United States, decided to offer all students a free paint job of their cars. So if they were to paint the car, Orange would pay for it. However, the only condition were that the car has to be painted orange. And suddenly there's 5,000 orange cars driving around in San Francisco, which is a somatic marker.
That new combination, that new thing that you've done, has to inspire a new way of seeing the world. Whether it's with music or art or science, it doesn't matter. You're just seeing something different or new that has a meaning to you.
With all these new discoveries in marketing, how is it changing the way brands are thinking and engaging with the consumer? And what is the future of advertising going to be like?
Brands will appeal to the senses much more. The sense of sound, the sense of sight, the sense of smell and taste and touch in a much more systematic way. And part of that is that they will be smashable. A smasher brand is based on the Coca-Cola bottle, which were invented in 1915. And the briefing was, in fact, to develop a bottle so smart that if you were to drop it on the floor and it would break into thousands of pieces, you could still pick up one piece of glass and recognize the brand. It's actually what brands have to work with in the future. They need to own those symbolics and do it in such a strong way. They own 20 or 30 of those. That means when I walk into a room, I really feel that this is owned by a brand.
Emotional ads are processed quite differently by the brain than those that appeal to logic, non-rational influence ads.
Every brand can be smashable, but not every brand is smashable today. There's a huge difference. And I think a lot of brands are failing today because they do believe fundamentally that this is all about building a logo. Yes, the logo will always be around and should be so, but the game is just as much to develop all the other touch points. So I feel the brand rather than just observing the brand on a logo.
But what is really new when everything already seems to have been invented?
It's clear that this is the early beginning. I was blown away with the effect it had on people and of companies, and I think it's true to say today that most major brands are using it as a way to conduct research. The brand will no longer be owned by the brand owners, it will be owned by the consumer. So we have a transformation taking place. Consumers, in the end of the day, fundamentally can destroy a brand in seconds on Facebook and Twitter, or they can build a brand.
I think it's very interesting to think about the future and where we're headed. Well, I think there's good news and bad news. I think on the one hand, people who are living in this sensory world of the screen technologies, the screen culture, will be less risk averse, simply because they are not so used to having a cognitive take on the world. But what they lack, because they don't have a cognitive take on the world, they won't have a deep understanding to evaluate whether something has a meaning or not.
Up next, find out how neuromarketing will continue to grow in the next few years, what concerns and what this means from the consumer's point of view. Ethics and the future of marketing and neuromarketing. As we start to see brands go crazy for the brain and use techniques to appeal more and more to what is discovered through science, the question comes to mind, is it ethical to manipulate messages and use techniques to generate a reaction from consumers?
We want to be stimulated all the time, and our brain makes us addicted to do that. As a consequence of that, our attention span is really low. Advertising has to appeal to a generation which really doesn't concentrate at all. Subliminal advertising that have an effect, amazing effect. Is it ethical and very wrong? Absolutely. And that's the reason why I've been very, very strong against the tobacco industries across the world to raise a flag, because consumers are literally not aware of that they are affected by subliminal advertising, which really is signals you can't see with your bare eyes, you just feel it, and it almost programs you to do a certain thing. Then you and I are so addicted to mobile and cell phones, to signals and messages on TV and print and wherever it is, so we can't really concentrate without having something which are stimulating us. And I'm sure you tried it. You're waiting for someone, and immediately while you're waiting, you check up your messages on your cell phone because you just want to do something. Or you're checking the messages on your cell phone all the time, even though there's no messages, because we are so addicted to receive that stimuli. In fact, there's a phenomenon which I call the phantom vibration syndrome, which is that you feel that your pocket is vibrating, right? And you don't have a cell phone in it, but it just vibrates anyway.
As it seems, it's all good from the brand's point of view. But what happens with consumers? Are we suddenly back to powerless fighting, like when advertisers first started convincing us to buy? Should we, as consumers, be afraid of neuromarketing?
I've looked into questions like, what are the ethics of, say, looking into brain states? And I would say that it's no more nor less ethical than doing any other kind of marketing study, and it probably has as many faults and benefits. There are caveats because, for example, in order to do a brain study, you put a person in an artificial situation and see how their brain reacts to a brand X or brand Y. But when people go out in life, that may not be a real replication of how they're actually going to act. So one caveat for people in business is don't be naive. Don't think that a brain study is necessarily going to give you better information than any other kind of marketing study. That said, I think there's a lot to be learned from using these new technologies for marketing and also really for human betterment.
The reason why I'm writing books like Brand Wash is to raise a flag for the consumer and let the consumer know that this is going on. Does it mean that I go against brands? No. It does mean, however, that certain brands are going too far. I think personally they're breaking the ethical standard, and that's what I'm raising in the book, and talking about how the next generation of companies have some new fundamental changed rules they have to follow or obey in order to survive, because we live in a world of WikiLeaks where there's no secrets anymore. There has to be 100% transparency into every brand. And that means brands can no longer operate on Madison Avenue in New York behind a one-way glass mirror and hope that no one will notice what's going on in a sneaky back room. Consumers will be aware of. And that means the ethical aspect have to change a lot with brands.
Another issue is the accuracy extent of interpretations resulting from data that is ultimately created in a controlled environment, while the market won't be as dependable.
Although it seems a very seductive and attractive explanation, it's what someone once called an anesthetic explanation. It's fine as data, but you have to be very careful how you interpret it. Now, let's think about the scanning of the mind of the consumer. Yes, I don't doubt for 1 minute if people are looking at certain brands, bits of the brain are lighting up. That's true. What it means is another question entirely. And also what you're missing out on is another big question. But there's so much more that's going on that you're missing. People will see a bit of the brain lighting up, being active. It doesn't tell you how the brain is working.
Brands should use neuromarketing measures qualitatively, without going too far. Emotional responses and stimuli isn't exactly like doing 1 + 1.
Worst case scenario is that you probably should unplug your TV and your computer, roll down the blinds and go to sleep. And hopefully you won't dream about brands. 51% of everything you and I talk about in every conversation throughout the entire day is about brands. So the depressing answer probably is no, there's not a lot we can do. The good news though is that if we're aware of it, it does not affect us nearly as much as if we're not aware of it.
I think people are realizing now more how the brain works as a whole. If you think about it, suggesting that the brain is just a load of mini brains that all work independently, and that seems a bit crazy. We know, for example, that there's at least 30 different brain regions that relate to vision. Now we know this because if people have strokes, certain aspects of their vision are deficient and others are fine. There's a lady in Germany, amazingly, who can see colour and shape, but she can't see movement, which is quite an interesting idea. Yeah? Somehow in the brain we know that it's a bit like instruments in an orchestra or ingredients in a dish of food. Somehow they all come together, give you a holistic experience. They work as a coordinated whole, yeah? You wouldn't say an orchestra was just the violins, or a dish of paella was just the onions, you know? It's part of it, and it's an essential part, but you can't reduce it. The whole is more than the sum of its parts, and that's how we should think of the brain. We know that the 3 great control systems of the body, the central nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system, have to talk to each other. which is why if you're feeling ill, you might be depressed, or if you're depressed, you get ill. And this is well known. The placebo effect of when you take something that is chemically inert, but if you believe it's going to make you better, it does, yeah? This is a very robust effect that everyone acknowledges, not least the pharmaceutical companies. Yeah?
Adjusting conclusions and conducting studies that combine neuromarketing with qualitative interviews with consumers while vouching for communication that nourishes engagement with consumer rather than pushing them into a purchase can surely become a positive impact in the near future. That's all for this episode of Market, but join us next time on a new marketing adventure.